channel, and I am on the English channel now. No, nothing. Nothing. Usually that's the headset I'm using all the time on Zoom and on Interaxio as well. Yeah. Okay. You are right. Yes, you're right to be picky. Yeah. Thank you.
Good morning, colleagues. I'm just testing English and the RSI languages, so this is just a test. Okay, and now I'm moving to Russian.
Nice. Good morning, honorable members of your parliament, distinguished colleagues. Thank you for invitation to take part in this very important conference on war in Ukraine. Politically, in case of such spectacular success of Ukrainian armies, for example, liberation of Kherson. Thank you for attention.
Right.
Good morning, Mr. FEYGIN. I hope I'm not grossly mispronouncing your last name, but we're now ready to test your connection. If you can please press on the speak button at the bottom of your page. Mr. FEYGIN, can you please press on the speak button at the bottom of your page, please? We would like to test your connection.
Один, два, один, два, один, два, один, два, три.
Hello, good morning. We can hear and we can see you. Can you hear and see us?
Yes, I hear. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. I'm just going to quickly send you a request. If you can just accept, you're going to see a window appearing on your screen. If you can just accept, please.
Agree? Agree?
Yes?
Okay.
Yes, okay. Is this the first time that you use this platform?
Yeah, first time.
Okay, so I'm just going to quickly explain you how it works. When it's going to be your time to take the floor, it's going to be similar to what happened now. So your speak button will turn blue, meaning that we're opening your connection and you can press it. So when the chair is going to call your name, you can press and speak. And you're going to become, then your speak button will become red, hence you're going to be visible to everybody.
I try.
Yeah, so this is what's happening now. If you press again on the speak button, that is blue now.
Now speak, yes?
Yes, now we can hear and we can see you both online and in the room. So if you want to listen to interpretation, we have English and Russian today.
Yes, Russian. I think I prefer speak Russian languages.
Yeah, so you can do that by pressing on the floor icon that you see on your left corner.
Floor, yeah?
Yes, and there you can click on...
I try now.
Well, you're not going to hear interpretation now because I'm not going to be interpreted, but when the meeting is going to start, you are going to...
Yes, Russian.
Yeah, you're going to be...
Russian.
Okay, well, you're getting interpreted now.
Okay.
So, yeah. Anyways, so you can just click on that button and you're going to listen to English and Russian interpretation during the meeting.
I prefer Russian. Now, one moment.
You can just keep it on Russian. You're just going to listen to Russian interpretation all throughout, except obviously when, when Russian is going to be spoken directly on the floor.
When will the translation start?
At 10 a.m. when the meeting is going to start. So in a few minutes only.
After 4 minutes, yes?
Yeah, very soon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you have any presentations, videos?
No.
Okay, perfect.
I press speak now, yes? Is the red line? If I speak, blue line, yes?
Yes.
You're going to translate it in any way.
Yeah, to speak English.
Yeah, please ask to turn on the microphone.
That's okay.
Thank you. Yes. So that's all. Do you have any other questions on how it works?
No.
Okay, perfect.
No.
If you need anything, anyways, we are. You can post a message in the chat. That you have the button on your top right of your screen, and we will be there to assist you. Thank you. Have a good meeting.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Let me start this very important conference hosted by the ECR group, and on behalf of the ECR group, I'm honored to have my dear colleague Kosma ZLOTOWSK. I'm Anna Fotyga, and well, we are going to present the excellent panel of speakers, convincing us about the state of play in Russia and in Russian politics. The title of the event is not only Putin. We intend to describe the Russian deep state, the state of Russian society and elites, and everything in the context of the Russian war on Ukraine, full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I give the floor briefly now to Kosma to welcome you as well, and then we'll start to present our very distinguished speakers one by one.
Good morning to everybody. Well, in the time of war in Ukraine and after the attack of the Russian army to Ukraine, we see that we know Russians and Russia not so well as we used to think that we know them. And now in the time of Ukrainian offensive, we can be happy that the Ukrainians are going better, but the possibility of using of nuclear weapons grows also. So the question is how Russians think what Russia will do. And the best speakers we can have are the people who know Russia, but sometimes not only Russia, but both Poland and Ukraine. So it's time to go.
Thank you, Kosma. It is also my pleasure to welcome here very distinguished members of the audience. We have Vice President of the Parliament, Robert Zile, as well as the chair of, or co-chair of ECR group, Professor Ryszard Legutko, other distinguished MEPs, and very important person in assessment of Russia, the rapporteur on Russia of the European Parliament, former Prime Minister of Lithuania, Andrius Kubilius. Well, my pleasure is also to welcome to this audience the former Foreign Minister of Ukraine, currently the Ambassador to the Council of Europe, Boris Tarasuk, who is to join us shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce our first speaker, quite well known already to the Parliament for those who monitor our actions. He used to speak numerous times. Quite recently, we remember him in presentations of war in Chechnya. It is my pleasure and privilege once more to welcome Yuri, Professor Yuri FELSHTINSKY, well-known Russian historian, writer, and analyst of Russian Federation and authorities, power within Russia, including deep state. Mr. FELSHTINSKY, you are well known for your famous books on blowing up Russia, the book focusing on the dramatic, tragic case of Mr. Litvinenko, your friend, and quite recent book, say similar, blowing up Ukraine. You used to warn the world about Russian or Putin's plans to wage the global war, the Third World War. Actually, there were your words on this. Could you please tell us about state of play in Russia, taking also into account recent developments?
Okay. Sorry. Thank you for the chance to talk to you, and thank you for coming here. I think it is very important to understand that 24th of February might be the day when future historians, and I'm a historian by education, will write this date as the beginning of the Third World War. I think that's where we are now. So this war is not about Ukraine. This is not a Russian-Ukrainian war. It started with Ukraine. Well, indeed, it started early. It started in 2008 with Georgia. It started in 2014 with Crimea and Ukraine. So that's where we are now. This is not a war about Ukraine. That's why it's probably will never stop with Ukraine unless we stop Putin in Ukraine. So our only chance to avoid a full-scale Third World War, probably even nuclear war, is to help Ukrainians to win while they are bravely fighting. To the great surprise, I have to say, of everybody, because that's not how people were expecting events to develop after 24th of February. Now, after 7 months of war, Russia, we have to say, has no army. This is both very, intriguing and important, because Russia lost its first echelon. They're trying to create a new army. They're trying to mobilize people. We see how this mobilization goes on. I do not really think they would be able to, to collect this new army. But then we have a main danger, which is coming from Russia, because they have nuclear weapons. And we see that rhetoric about nuclear weapons is becoming more and more aggressive with days. So not only we have to stop Russia in Ukraine, we also have to prevent it from using nuclear weapons. And this is quite difficult. I would say that we have the best chance to fight Russia if we allow Ukrainians, and this is not done so far, to hit enemy's territory. Ukrainians at this point are receiving weapons from the West, and this is great help. No one is arguing this, on the conditions that they are not allowed to attack Belarus territory and Russian territory where troops are concentrated. And from military point of view, and I spent a lot of time studying Second World War, of course, you cannot win the war if you are not allowed to hit enemy's troops concentrated, along the border. And that's what's happening now. So Russia is regrouping in Belarus. Russia is regrouping in, along the Russian-Ukrainian border, and then proceed with attacks. So Ukrainians are holding the advances, but they are not able to win. unless, again, they are allowed to do militarily what they have to be in order to win the war. I do not think Putin is ready at this point to use nuclear weapons, but he is coming to this decision. He will come to this decision. And I think there is a very good chance that he will do it not from the territory of the Russian Federation, because this might be suicidal for him, but from the territory of Belarus. And I think this is precisely the reason why he keeps Belarus independent, because we have to ask ourselves, with all this crazy love for annexations, why Belarus is not annexed. And because in 2021, Belarus was quietly taken by Russia. For all practical purposes, Belarus is under Putin's control. And Lukashenko, as we know, is not even independent dictator. He is the dictator, but he is not independent. So the question is why Putin is not annexing Belarus. And I think the answer is he's keeping it independent, so the nuclear strike will come from Belarus and not from the Russian Federation. And for this, we need to concentrate our attention and try to take Belarus out of Russia's control. Because if Putin loses Belarus, not only he is losing strategically important territory, which allows him to border Eastern Europe. He has then common borders with several Eastern European states. But this also takes platform from him to strike from Belarus. And then this probably is the best way to avoid nuclear confrontation. Because once again, Putin has no conventional army. He would not be able to recreate it, thanks to Ukrainians and thanks to Western help to Ukraine. But we need to concentrate on his ability to use nuclear weapons, because this might be the next stage of this war. So I may stop for now, and we probably may continue this discussion later.
Thank you, Professor FELSHTINSKY. Thank you for this first round. We'll have a second, most probably as well, and also engagement with the audience. Now I pass the floor to Kosma. Please introduce our next speaker.
Our next speaker present here in Strasbourg is Mr. llya Vladimirovich PONOMAREV.
Yes. Sorry.
I'm sorry. He is present here in Strasbourg, but our next speaker is present online. It's Mark FEYGIN, Russian lawyer and politician, former MP, and vice mayor of Samara. Mr. FEYGIN, you have the floor.
Well, really nice to see you all. Well, I'm in Europe for the moment, but I don't have a possibility to be in Strasbourg with you. You can hear me, right? I cannot be in person in Strasbourg. Nevertheless, I have a couple of thoughts that I would like to share with the audience. Well, I join the opinion of Yuri FELSHTINSKY, who said that the nuclear threat as a last recourse of Vladimir Putin is the mean of blackmail of the collective West, but also as a mean to change the situation in his favor. He would haven't used the nuclear solution if the situation would have been better for him, because he wanted to take Ukraine in a short term, in a couple of days or a couple of weeks. That was the plan, but it didn't happen. And the situation of Kremlin, I would say, is in crisis. Kremlin is in crisis. It's not catastrophic yet, but it's very close to crisis, because inside of the military and political elite, there are some contradictions, and there's tension. So on one side is it means that they're losing the war, especially after Kharkiv counteroffensive, but also it's a danger that after having used all conventional means, Putin might use non-conventional means. And here we're talking, of course, about using nuclear weapons, arms. We have to be serious with this. We have to take it seriously, even though a lot of countries who follow the situation, Western countries, say that there are no signs that he will use it. Nevertheless, this threat is getting bigger and bigger, especially because the situation inside Russian Federation is becoming more and more negative for Putin. Putin is very scared to lose his authority, his power, because in Russia, it means if he loses power, he loses authority. It means that he is not only going to use some, money or means, but his life, because it's a question of the life and death for him. And not only of the system that was created by Putin in these 25 years, but his personal life. What can a person do in this situation? Would this person use the last mean that he has got? In his case, it would be the nuclear weapon. And the answer to this question is yes, he might use it. Understanding that being 70 years old, he will turn 70 on October the 7th, by the way. But it becomes not only political question, but also a question of his mental state and physical state. He's scared of death, of physical death. And this is how he thinks. And especially he's scared of a violent death, which can happen after any coup d'etat or any revolution in the country. Of course, the elites might want to get rid of him. This is also an option in case Russia loses. So they will blame everything on him. All the crimes, all the mistakes that Russia has committed in Ukraine after the war started on February the 24th. So Russians could blame everything on him, and the elite might survive, and the whole system might survive that was created by Putin. In order to avoid this, I think the West needs not to ignore the situation inside Russia, try to make an impact in Russia by supporting Russian opposition, by supporting people who try to have an external impact, an external action. Would it be on the information field, on other fields? So in order for Putin not to be able to make this decision of using the nuclear arms, and Russian doctrine foresees that in case if Russia's existence is under question, they might use it. And it can be, Russia is interpreting this doctrine, these threats very broadly. For the moment, they think that an attempt to deoccupy of Ukrainian territory that were announced Russia's on September 30th, they consider it as a threat to the Russian security. But of course, we understand that it's a pretext to. It's a pretext. We understand that Putin is just scared for his power, for his seat. He cannot lose. This is his political impasse. He is in a situation where if he concedes the territory in Ukraine, he will be over. So he's transforming this imperialistic war into a civil war in Russia. So, of course, Russian society, we have very, very rich elite and all others who are poor. So there are big differences in Russian society. And there is a corrupted system where the war is something that the elite doesn't really want. So the authority doesn't want to make war. They want to corrupt. They want to make money, as they did for the 20 previous years. And the elite can accept the elimination of Putin. When I'm talking about the elite, I'm talking about the federal level, I'm talking about the regions of the Russian Federation. They can accept this replacement of Putin to someone who will be able to make a deal with the West. Now about the army and the security services. The army is in a situation where it has to accept the defeat for the war in Ukraine. Since the army would be the one that will be blamed. Well, they don't really like it. So the troops do not like it in their entrenchment. The generals do not like it either. Because in Russia, we're also always searching for a scapegoat. This is a normal Russian tradition to find a scapegoat. And for the moment, of course, the secret services, FSB, they are loyal to Putin for the moment. National Guard, etc., etc. For the moment, they are loyal to Putin because they understand that in case of changes, they will be impacted as well. On the contrary, from the others. So he will have this resource till the end. There are also some paramilitary organizations created by Putin in the Caucasus, mostly, associated with Mr. Kadyrov, the head of Chechnya, and Mr. Prigozhin, who is the founder of what we call private military company, Wagner, but it's not, just there are a lot of companies that not only Wagner company. It was created by the Russian military intelligence, and now it's an autonomous unit, military unit. Okay, there are a lot of people who died from this private military company in Donbass and in Kherson. And these paramilitary units are getting replenished, and they're absolutely loyal to Putin. We don't see any kind of internal conflict inside this paramilitary units with Vladimir Putin. He can use them, and we can have up to 45,000 people over there for the moment, and they can protect him, Putin, and they can protect him even to use, so he will be able to use the nuclear arms. So, and I think the West has to think about these paramilitary companies as well. I think everything is centered on Putin's power, and I think that we need to do everything in order to not to not be able Putin to protect his power for all the reasons that I have just told you. And if the war continues as it continues today, and if the mobilization doesn't give the result that Putin wants, I think it might be finished up to the spring 2023. Ukraine, for the spring 2023, has a possibility to deoccupy Donbass and to occupy territories on the left side of the Dnipro River. So it's Melitopol, the cities were near to Crimea, near to Chingarsk, where the Ukrainian army can attack Crimea and to possibly deoccupy it. It will be possible if we will prevent Putin from using nuclear arms, and if mobilized Russians, 150,000 will be used in the south and in the east, And if so, the result will not be achieved by the Russians. And the third, if the Western support will not only consist in more and more arms, not only in the quality and the quantity of arms, but also if the West supplies new types of arms to Ukraine, and if Ukraine is accepted to NATO, which might help to create what we call a nuclear umbrella under Ukraine, over Ukraine, and will not allow Putin to use nuclear arms. So if these three conditions are met, I think Ukraine has a possibility, has a chance to finish the war in spring 2023. That's all for me.
Much indeed. Colleagues will have time for reflections from the audience later on. Now we have to continue remote connections. We have second important distinguished speaker, Oleksiy ARESTOVYCH, who is one of advisors to the President Zelensky, and he is well known also for joint daily blog debates with Mr. Mark FEYGIN. We have him already in connection. Mr. ARESTOVYCH, can you take the floor? Thank you.
Yes, I hear you well. Дамы и господа, для меня...
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a big honor for me to speak in front of you. Thanks for this possibility. And I would like to concentrate on the following. So all the Putin's rhetoric has this anti-West character, especially when he signed the 4 decrees to annex the 4 territories. He used the word West more than 10 times, and he said 2 very important phrases. He said that the solution of the Soviet Union is the biggest disaster of the 20th century, and his disaster as well. And we can see that in his actions. And Ukraine is on his way, because he cannot expand to the West if he doesn't do that with the former Soviet countries. And even the energy resources are the second factor for him.
С точки зрения Европа...
And from his point of view, collective Western Europe are quite weak, and their main mistake, according to Putin, is to opt for comfort and not for principles. He doesn't believe in people's will. He doesn't believe in democratization. He doesn't believe that people have the right to choose and the right to debate. And it's the result of his politics. He graduated from the most Western university in Russia, in its most Western city. It's an irony of fate, but he believes and he is confident that deep state is, well, the best solution. A state where very few people are responsible for the main tasks, like bandits. Well, of course, it's reminiscent of his youth in St. Petersburg when he was involved in some illegal activities. And it has remained the same during his whole rule from the Chechen war. He is involved in the physical elimination of his adversaries in Russia as well as abroad. Think about Skripal and about others. And of course, he is ready to use power against other states. He not only annexed Crimea, he also got involved in Syria, in Africa, in Mali and in other countries. He started to act in those zones where they extract uranium and other valuable resources. So he offered his own military help to regimes in place there. So that's Putin's model. And he's offering this model to the world, and Western powers are his main adversaries. His last speech was quite anti-colonial because he is trying to win sympathy from African and other countries. He tries to speak to China, and the main threat is even not to Ukraine. Ukraine, well, is a country he's using as a leverage, is a country that abandoned him and opted for Western values. It's also an option to make Russia stronger, because he is also always repeating the words that, well, together with Ukraine, Russia is an empire. But he wants to make use of Ukraine and then continue with warmongering and with threatening Western countries. And I believe everyone understands it now. When Putin is waging war against Western countries, well, in the reaction in the West is, well, the reaction that he is expecting. It's Machiavellian policy. He is thinking about balance of powers and of pursuing his interests in the most cynical way. During 22 years, he has been playing with Russian people. Those who approve of his action in Ukraine remember of the war in Chechnya. During the first Chechen war, Russian mothers were able to pick up their sons' bodies in Ukraine, and now tens of thousands of Russian soldiers are kept, their bodies are kept in Ukraine in refrigerators. We offered quite a few times to take them, and no one was willing, no mother expressed her will to find her son's body. So he believes that Russian countries are quite immoral. He is sure that the Western countries opted for comfort and are not thinking about principles. So now Europe has proven that principles are more important than comfort, are more important than fear, even the fear of the nuclear war, so he doesn't have time. We were ready to sacrifice our comfort for our values, and of course, now he wants to prove that he is right. I don't have a long experience in policy, but I know that people are always limited by their worldview. I tried to describe his worldview. He is quite confident that, of course, Western countries are attached to some principles, but those principles are determined by their geopolitical interests. But of course, threat of the nuclear threat is the ultimate threat to the Western countries. So he is threatening Western countries, and those threats have proven themselves efficient in Russia. So he is quite desperate. Those are arguments by a desperate person, but he is confident that this time it will work, and that Western countries will start negotiating. It's warmongering, fearmongering, and the result of his whole policy, cynic policy. So if we give him the opportunity to show that he is right, it will not be a right decision. And one more thing. When Putin pronounced his first speech one day before the invasion, he didn't use any political or economical arguments. He was talking about history, about Kievan Rus, about Orthodox religion, and he gave also other arguments. Well, it reminds us of old conflicts between France and Germany of the medieval times. And that's why he was not his threats were not perceived as serious ones. And he is making use of those arguments. He is ready to sacrifice tens of thousands of people. He is ready to break all the rules of the war in order to pursue his practical goals that are quite irrational. Well, I believe the diagnosis has been made by American ambassador in 1941, and I believe that our main goal now is to choose the fate of the whole world. Either we will cooperate for the common good to protect our common values, or we will be promoting this criminal policy because made by this man. And we should say no, and not only in theory, not only should we show that we don't want this fate for the world, but we also need to introduce some practical sanctions and without abandoning our work inside Russia. Quite often we are making use of some propaganda that is quite primitive, saying that Russians are slaves. I don't believe this. I believe that different ethnicities in Russia have the possibility to transform Russian Federation and to return it to the community of nations. So we need to make a difference between Putin's regime and different nations within Russia. Putin's regime is immoral and cynical, and it should be our main target in our informational war. And at the end of my speech, I would like to say one more time that we should make it clear that nuclear blackmailing is unacceptable. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. ARESTOVYCH.
Guest and here present in Strasbourg, Mr. llya PONOMAREV. He was a member of State Duma, and in 2014 he voted as the only member of Duma against the annexation of Crimea, and then he was forced to leave Russia. Mr. PONOMAREV, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for having me here. And let me
Хочу сказать пару слов о том,
to say that it's a war between Ukraine and Russia. I think it's a war between global anti-Putin coalition, what Oleksiy ARESTOVYCH was just saying, and the new evil, the new fascism that reincarnated in modern-day Russia and led by Vladimir Putin. And in this situation, you cannot stay neutral. You cannot say that it's not my war. You cannot say that it's Ukrainians who should take the fight and we just help them. No, this is something that we cannot stay aside. And that is something that Eastern Europeans and Baltic states, they understand very well, but unfortunately not so well in the rest of the world. Another thing to say is that many people hope that the situation would change by itself. And in a sense, they're right. Putin's regime, historically, is doomed. It was built from the very beginning as a Bonapartist regime, which is dependent on one particular individual, and when this individual is gone, the whole system would shamble and would be destroyed. But whether the new regime would be better than this one, I highly, highly doubt. Ukraine can win this war, and we see it on the field of battle, how Ukrainian army is advancing, and we see that so much feared the second largest army in the world is actually retreating and cannot put the fight. But what is the end of the war? The liberation of Ukrainian territory? I agree that the risks which right now exist with the application of the nuclear weapons are quite high. And what would be the toll of just liberating Ukrainian territory? And what would be the outcome? We in Russia, we already saw the situation when, for example, Chechens managed to win the first Chechen war and managed to force, that time, Boris Yeltsin to sign a peace treaty with them. So what, 3 years have passed and the situation returned to where it was, and the new war has started. And I am fully convinced if the end of this war would not be the destruction of the very system that started this war, it would continue again and again and again. That's why deimperialization, decolonization, and demilitarization of Russia is a must that needs to be the very top of our agenda today. And what I unfortunately see all the time is that when we are talking with the representatives of the West, we're always thinking about very tactical things. What kind of weapons needs to be delivered to Ukraine now? What kind of financial assistance needs to be dealt with? But so far, there is no vision of what would be the world after this madness will end. And that's a very important thing because it leaves a lot of room for Russian propaganda to speculate about what does the West want at the end of the day. There are even military-related questions where we don't have the answers. For example, what is our vision about the nuclear weapons on the former post-Soviet space? But also there are many other matters like whether we would like Russia to stay united or be separated with all the national republics and people who are living in modern-day Russia. This is something that we need to discuss together because we need to get our position synchronized. And in general, I am very much calling for a proactive approach, not reactive one that we are taking at this very moment. Again, coming to this analogy of a global anti-Hitler coalition of today, anti-Putin coalition that we have right now, we need our own de Gaulle inside this coalition. We need to partner with the forces in Russia who are ready to liberate the country and who are ready to present a real alternative. I think that the obvious lead in this coalition should belong to Ukraine because Ukraine is in the front lines of fighting. But it's also our common cause. It's our common deed. It should be our common vision and it should be our common victory at the end of the day. The strategy that we can implement is based on three major pillars. Firstly, we need to achieve the split within Russian elites because at no place in time, no revolution ever happened, at least in Russia, without having at least part of the elites supporting the change. And to achieve this split, we have two instruments that can and should be applied. Firstly, it's the instrument of sanctions, but they would be effective when there is not just the way in, but also the way out. Because sanctions are not the punishments. Sanctions is the policy tool. Sanctions is something that we are telling Russian business people and state bureaucrats that we want you to do this and that, and that's your way out if you follow the path of normal behavior that those who apply the sanctions want them to take. And secondly, it's the construction of alternative legitimacy. Also Russian elites and as well as the Russian ordinary people, they should understand the answer to a very simple question. If not Putin, then whom? And then what? What is the overarching dream of the perfect Russia of tomorrow? What should we have when Putin is gone? And without having this alternative legitimacy and the alternative vision, no changes are even theoretically possible. Nobody wants to jump into the unknown. The second pillar is the construction of the resistance movement inside Russia itself. And it also consists of two parts. Is what is growing right now in Russia, and I highly encourage you to watch closely this process, is the partisan movement. Right now, every single day something is happening. There are attacks on the military recruiting posts. There are acts of railroad sabotage. There are attacks on the pro-war activists. Every single day something is happening. And it's a very genuine grassroots movement. So I fully agree with my colleagues that were speaking before me. When we deny Russian people the very ability to take the action, it's not fair. They do take the action. The new generation of youngsters, the new generation of fighters is coming. they don't see the Russian opposition of yesterday, and they take it as important and incapable of achieving the results, but they do want to take the action by themselves. And they are courage enough to risk their lives with it. We already twice lost people inside Russia, killed by FSB officers. There was a group of 2 that was assassinated in August in Volgograd, and just 2 days ago there was another group of ours that was assassinated in Kabardino-Balkaria, Northern Caucasus. But more and more people are coming every day to take the fight. And also it's the information warfare. We speak a lot, really a lot with Western representatives about how we should speak with Russians, delivering them the truth. We have created one media channel in Kiev, which is called Utro Fevraля, February's Morning, which is speaking with Russians. We now have a lot of Russian language media which are speaking with Russians which left Russia. But those who are speaking with Russians who stayed in Russia, and I totally in solidarity with the position of those European states who don't want to encourage immigration from Russia, who want to encourage Russians to stay in Russia and take the fight. But we also need the tools to speak with them and support those tools. Just look at the very recent example of protests in Dagestan that were coordinated through our media channel, which turned it right now to be the main protest resource in Northern Caucasus. That says that this tool is the right thing how the fight should be taken. And the very last pillar, the third one, is emergence of Russian troops inside Ukraine which are fighting alongside with the Ukrainian army. When I was speaking about the Great Coalition, I don't know how much you are aware of it, but right now in the Ukrainian army there are national divisions of a lot of different nations and people. There are Chechens, there are Dagestanis, there are Crimean Tatars, there are Belarusians, and also there are Russians. From very first day of war, which started not in 2022, which started in 2014, from the very first days of war, there are several thousand Russians who are fighting alongside with Ukrainians. And they are fighting within different volunteer groups, and they spill their blood. And there are many people, unfortunately, who died already at the fields of the war. Currently, our estimate that in Ukraine, it's approximately 4,000 Russian people who are fighting within the Ukrainian army. And we have a huge line of people who want to join. Just before the mobilization started, only Legion of Free Russia, who is right now the main center of Russians who are fighting in the Ukrainian army, had more than 3,000 people in line who applied to join the ranks of the Legion to move into Ukraine and to take the weapons and confront Putin. After the mobilization was announced, this number, as of last week, it was already doubled. As of this week, I'm pretty sure it would be triple as much as it was before. And that's the key thing, because we will not be able to liberate Moscow without having troops on the ground. And Ukrainians would not invade Russia. NATO forces would never invade Russia. It should be Russians. It's our job. And I want to assure you that there are Russians who are ready to do this. Thank you.
Thank you. I should add, although it already emerged in llya Ponomarev's speech that he is Kiev-based, although in my engagement in dealing with free nations of Russia, there were already 3 conferences and on many other topics referring to war in Ukraine, and in particular stance of the Russian opposition. I used to meet llya quite frequently, whether in Montenegro, in Gdańsk, in Karpacz. He's always in Warsaw. He's always there, and in particular active in Kiev. I think that it should be acknowledged, and therefore we wanted to present his activity to the West also, and show there are people not only thinking, not only gathering in the West, but also very actively combating the evil. Ladies and gentlemen, let me present the last panelist, last but absolutely not least, an outstanding Russian opposition member, an intellectual, mathematician, political writer, Mr. Andrei PIONTKOVSKY. His presentation was pre-recorded yesterday. He was not able to participate in person during this seminar, but believe me, it is really fruitful to listen to his speech. Mr. PIONTKOVSKY, floor is yours.
Nice. Good morning, honorable members of your Parliament, distinguished colleagues. Thank you for invitation to take part in this very important conference on war in Ukraine and support of Putin in the country and abroad. The subject of our conference could not be more timely. Just now, before our eyes, dramatic changes are going in perception of the war, both in Russian society and elites. This change in perception certainly are driven by brilliant successes of Ukrainian military. Now, after Kharkov counteroffensive, Putin faces unsupportable for him but irreversible reality, and he denies it. And denying this reality, for the first time, he creates very serious problems both with his immediate entourage, his inner circle, and society in general. Returning from Samarkand, when he suffered humiliating defeat in the meeting with persons, with world leaders whom he considered as his allies, he lost his balance and in the morning of September 19th committed several fatal political blunders. First, mobilization. Second, referendums and annexation of 4 regions of Ukraine. Third, he renewed his nuclear blackmail. And finally, he blew up 2 tubes of Northern Stream. All these acts were intended to raise the stakes in the conflict. It was sharp rupture with his own policy of previous months. He and his entourage realized that strategically war is lost, that ambitious objectives they declared at the beginning of the conflict are not achievable, And the main task of his ruling group is try to save their power and their enormous fortunes in the country suffering military defeat. And for this purpose, he tried to find so-called intermediaries among world leaders whose task would be to impose on Zelensky some kind of cessation of hostility, leaving in Putin's hands a lot of Ukrainian territory. First, he sent to them Zelensky, Macron, Scholz, and Draghi. They failed. And then he tried to use the services of Mr. Erdogan. But he understood after his humiliation defeat in Samarkand that this attempt of soft getting out of conflict will lead to his dismissal by his inner circle, because without Putin, it would be easy for them to find common language both with Western leaders and maybe with Ukraine, and to find some soft form of creeping capitulation. And the conflict arose between him and his entourage. He imposed on September 19th this 4-level escalation on his inner circle, but they are not happy with it. But what's more important for him, mobilization has for the first time in his 24 rules create a base for mass huge discontent. There are 25 million reservists in the country, and each of them could be mobilized. His plan now to get 1 million reserves, but 25 million are under threat of this mobilization. And these people, maybe they more or less supported war, watching it on TV screens, but they are not enthusiastic enough to die for Putin's imperial ambition. Those who were zombied by his imperial propaganda already left for Ukraine and already died them. So there's enormous mass of people hostile to his decision. And these two potential areas of conflicts between him and his inner circle and him with society in general will grow drastically with every new success of Ukrainian army. The first reaction on mobilization decree is fleeing from the country approximately 200 draftees, 200 people. Basically, they're people there's middle class people with money, with foreign passports, with some connections abroad. Those who go to die are representatives of so-called deep people, glubinny narod, his traditional base of support, and he is losing this base. This process is irreversible. My modest assessment of situation is that Putin will not survive politically in case of such spectacular success of Ukrainian army as, for example, liberation of Kherson. Thank you for attention.
Thank you very much. And now, ladies and gentlemen, there is a time for discussion. Mr. Kubilius.
Well, first of all, Diana and Kosma, thanks a lot for this brilliant conference. Second, since I want to appeal to speakers who speak Russian language, and still I remember that language, so I'll try to use my qualities. Спасибо за...
Thank you very much. Thank you for your words. Thank you for all our 5 speakers. And thanks to Ukrainian army for everything they are doing for the whole world. I would like to stress 2 points. And I would like to speak to our friends in Russia and Ukraine. I am permanent rapporteur on Russia, but unofficially we've been doing a lot with Russian Democrats, with representatives of Ukraine. I also launched an informal, formal Friends of European Russia back in 2019. We are trying to pursue this perspective, and Ukraine is helping a lot to move Russia in this direction. So I would like to stress 2 points. First of all, Mr. FELSHTINSKY and Mr. FEYGIN, well, every evening we are watching your talks with ARESTOVYCH, and you really help us a lot to understand the situation. A question about Putin's nuclear threats. Of course, this threat exists, and we should treat it very seriously. But can we afford to talk about it so often? Maybe it's Putin's goal to make us talk about it a lot. So I believe we should say the same thing as our American colleagues did. If Russia makes use of this weapon, she will face immediate forceful reaction, and stop talking about it, stop repeating things about it, because, well, we see that if we talk about it a lot, some Elon Musk will get involved in this discussion brusquely and start talking about Crimea, Third World War, etc. So psychologically, I don't know what's the best attitude. Maybe we should make one statement and stop discussing it. Second point. Your words are really necessary for the Western countries so that we here have a better long-term strategy for Ukraine and for Russia, especially for Russia, because I see that Baltic countries, Central European countries, and Western countries have less and less faith in Russia, even if Russia loses this war. And if there is no faith, then it means we don't want to think about a long-term strategy. And this strategy should make connections, interlinks between Ukraine and changes in Russia. So I have a question to Mr. ARESTOVYCH maybe, and as well as to Mark FEYGIN. Why did Putin decide to launch this aggression against Ukraine? Was it his own self-confidence, or maybe was it his feeling that he is at the head of an empire at the final stages of its life? And if Ukraine becomes a democracy and a strong economy, it may be a dangerous example for the citizens of Russia. So maybe it was the reason behind his aggression. So for me, it's the second reason, which is the correct one. So what should be Western reaction to the changes in Russia and to Ukraine? So I believe that we should help Ukraine in any possible way, because Ukraine should be victorious in this war. We should restore Ukraine so that it becomes a successful country, a member of the European Union and a member of NATO. So Ukraine's success would be an example for Russia, so that in Russia they have a new dream, so that they start dreaming not about restoring an empire, but about building a normal life in Russia itself.
Mr. Mark FEYGIN and Mr. ARESTOVYCH to speak at the very beginning of the seminar, because they had to leave. So they are not able to answer your questions now, but of course we pass all relevant questions to them and eventually distribute answers. So discussions will be with our two panelists that are physically present here in the chamber. Now I give the floor to Kosma to conduct further debate.
Well, if anyone wants to take the floor, Mrs. Brzezionova.
So, thank you very much. At the beginning, thank you for Mrs. Fotyga and Mr. ZLOTOWSK for organizing this very interesting seminar. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for all very interesting speeches, and I think it brings a little bit more questions than answer. But I have one concrete question for Professor FELSHTINSKY. It was very interested I was very interested in what you said about Belarus. It would certainly help a lot to try pull Belarus out of Putin's influence. But do you think it's really how to do it, or do you think there is a way how to achieve it? And by the way, what's about the actual situation in Belarus now, if you can inform us? Thank you.
And Mr. Zile, the third question, and then we would like to have some answer.
So thank you, Anna, and thank you, Kosma, for organizing it, this event, and also for all the speakers, even those who are no more listening us. But I think it's on the strategic issue what Mr. PONOMAREV already described. So I fully agree that without de-imperialization, all this, how to say, brainwashing what was in a Russian society for decades, I think it's absolutely crucial point. I had some doubts a bit, is it possible? Because I expected that the younger generation of Russians, those who were born in late 80s, early 90s, they already don't dream about so much about empiric, but I was wrong. So Putin created a system how to influence this younger generation. So do you really see that if after the Putin time, and after all this elite of the Putin, is it possible that Russia will change strategically, not in 1 year, I am sure, but in a certain time, more or less democratically to the, without civil war, to the Russia what we expect to see in the future. And on tactical issues, and also for this point, it's important. My country this weekend was elections. Russian-speaking parties, as we always calling, so they changed. But if you see there are so big support of those, so pro-Russians speak, well, Russian language-speaking parties, I would say, so they got those more radical. They get a more gain. They are not so big share of the society, but among the Russian-speaking populations, they received a gain comparably with more moderate parties in the previous elections. So this is we have to take in account. Even those who are living not in Russia, but living in this information society abroad in Western Europe, let's say Eastern Central Europe, they are, well, thinking a bit differently. And the tactical issue about what Mr. FELSHTINSKY, you mentioned about this Putin aim to use these tactical weapons from Belarus. What does it change? Because anyway, from the Western point of view, because anyone understands that Belarus doesn't have nuclear power, arms, so that means it's anyway it's Russian. So what do you think? What is why he thinks that it will help us? And also what Mr. Kubilic said. So not to speak not to speak about the nuclear threats of Russia. So that's how we best respond. From one point of view, it's correct to my opinion, but if it happens, so and Russia will use tactical nuclear arms in Ukraine, so West, not only Americans, but NATO should be more or less united. If Americans do alone, I think it's created some difficulties in transatlantic coalition. That's why I think perhaps we don't need to speak publicly, but on the government level, so on the responsible people should be absolutely clear what would be the joint response of NATO. Otherwise, we are in a danger, and Putin even can succeed with this tactical step. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Perhaps Mr. PONOMAREV? No?
Okay. Thank you. I will try to address the questions that were asked. First of all, before why Putin has started this whole thing, I think he started because he could. He thought he could. It was a pure opportunistic thing. He was obviously misinformed. He acted irrationally, as it turned out to be. But he thought that Zelensky is weak, that Ukrainian society is split, that there is a serious pro-Russian opposition within Ukraine, and it's a good moment to do it. That's as simple as that. I think that in general the conflict, yes, has a more deeper roots. It's a value conflict, and the revolution in Ukraine obviously is a very bad example for Russians in the eyes of Putin. And he never wanted Ukraine to be successful. But at the same time, you know, this particular decision, I think, was very opportunistic. And in general, Putin is not a great strategist. He's a, I think, pretty brilliant tactician, but he's not a long-term thinker at all. And that's important to understand. And that actually gives the answer for the second question: what is the success of Ukraine? What is, in general, our common success of a united West in this war? And obviously, it's the prosperity of Ukrainian people. Prosperity of Ukrainian people is the illustration for all of the post-Soviet space, not only Russia, by the way, for all of the post-Soviet space, that democracy and prosperity is one thing, and that it's beneficial for people to take power in their own hands. But Andres, for your remark, it's very important to understand you are working so hard, and I really admire your work on the Marshall Plan for Ukraine. But one of the key things to see here, we all, probably not so many people actually do know this, but who is the main donor of arms to the Ukrainian army at the moment? Is Russian army, because it's a captured military equipment. And who would be the main donor for Marshall Plan of Ukraine after the victory? It also would be Russia with the reparations. I think that actually 3/4 of overall financing would actually come from the Russian budget. And it's not only the currency reserves, which are currently frozen in Europe and in the United States, but it's also economic programs that should be initiated inside Russia and which would benefit restoration of Ukrainian economy and Ukrainian infrastructure. And that's again something that we need to think about at the moment. Not just ask for an assistance from the West, but about these programs which would be running after the victory. Are there changes possible in Russia, and what are they? Of course they are. And I think that in general, this situation, many people say that I am exaggerating when I am drawing these parallels, but I really think it's a correct parallel. It's a situation with the World War II. Okay, Germany has started the war, but it doesn't mean that it was not included back in the normal civilized society shortly after that. Yeah, it took time, but not so much time. It was all in the eyes of one generation. And right now it's one of key foundations of the European Union. And I do believe, I genuinely believe that the future Russia, whatever would be on the place of Russia, because I don't 100% sure, I'm not 100% sure that it would be Russian Federation. I think that it would be something new in this place, but nevertheless, I do believe it would be one of the foundation of our joint civilization. We just need to be inclusive. We need to not to say that it's a stigma which would be for all of the time, and we need to properly draft the transition period from the awful state of today to the perfect state of democracy tomorrow. And we should remember that basic human rights are not just limited to free elections or freedom of speech, but it's also access people to public goods. It's destruction of the oligarchy which plagues the Russian society and many of the societies of post-Soviet countries. It's a positive drink for people who should inspire them. And it doesn't matter which language they speak, whether they speak Russian, whether they speak Ukrainian, whether they speak Tatar, or whether they speak any other languages. It's the common dream which would inspire them and bring them forward. And to conclude with Belarus, I think that in general the situation has gone pretty far. I think that in general, the Western strategy towards Belarus was flawed for a very long time. But I think that Lukashenko would be doing his best not to be directly involved, not to join the war. He is the kind of guy who would gladly join the victorious war. But he is smart enough to understand that he is not going to join the war which is lost already. But one of the strategies can be to first change the situation in Belarus and then go into Russia. And right now, again, military regiments inside Ukraine, Belarusians are pretty strong enough already to actually carry the task. So it's something that needs to be strategically discussed. Thank you.
Llya Vladimirovich, thank you very much. It was very, very optimistic remark. And now, Mr. FELSHTINSKY.
I will try to cover quickly several points. First of all, the main problem with which we are dealing is not Putin. The main problem is that Russia is run by state security, by the FSB, former KGB. They took power in 2000. Putin came to rule Russia on behalf of the FSB, and that's why the regime there is comparatively stable, and that's why I do not really believe that if something happens to Putin tomorrow, not necessarily something would change. This is not how I see situation. So unless we find the way somehow to take control of Russia out of the FSB, we are going to have this problem constantly. So this is not about Putin, and that's where the difference is between Belarus and Russia, where everything there is about Lukashenko staying in power. Nuclear danger, should we talk about this or not? I agree with that we should mention it once and stop talking about this. This is correct. Nevertheless, I have to say that in 2013, for example, no one would predict Russia to invade Ukraine. This happened, I mean, we were not ready for this. In February of 2022, majority of people were thinking that Putin is bluffing, that the concentration of troops along the Russian-Ukrainian border is a bluff. And it would be a bluff if Zelensky would surrender when he was offered to capitulate in exchange for not invading the country. But he did not surrender and the war started. So the bluff, initial bluff, became a real war. This book, which some of you saw, actually was written and published in 2015. It was published in Russian, Ukrainian, and Polish. In 2015, the majority of people did not expect Putin to start full-scale war with Ukraine. My point is that the fact that today we think that nuclear option is really kind of not realistic, even for Putin, doesn't really mean that we should not be prepare for this or should not think about this danger. I think we should. Although I do agree that Putin is using this today as a bluff, as a form of, to frighten us and to force us to surrender. And, once it's said that this bluff is not working, I guess I agree we could stop it here. What's wrong with Russia? We know what's wrong with Russia. Russia was never a democracy. It was Russian Empire prior to 1917. It was Soviet Empire prior to 1991. Russian people never had experience in democracy, and except for like 91, 93 recently. Unless Russia stops thinking as an imperial Russia, we are going to have problems with this country in the future. I am afraid that the only way to help Russians to think that they should exist only in a form of democracy is to help them to be defeated in a war. In other words, Russia could become a normal country. I speak Russian, I write in Russian, I publish in Russian, but only if Russia will suffer a defeat similar to the defeat of Germany in 1945 and Japan in 1945. And this defeat will happen as a result of war, which Putin started. Once again, he started it on 24th of February. The question is when this war will end and how much we would have all of us to pay for the victory in this war. And this is a difficult question for which we do not have an answer. I would not be so optimistic as some, like Andrei PIONTKOVSKY, for example, suggested that the war might be over, in the spring of Mark FEYGIN, the war would be over in the spring of 23. I do not think so. I think it's going to be with us for some time, unless we support Ukraine on the level which would allow Ukrainian forces to strike preventively. Right now, for example, we have indications that Russian planes are moved to Belarus. that Russian mobilization, which Putin has difficulties with, that those troops are now moved to Belarus. What's an indication either of his desire to have another strike against Kiev, what I think is absolutely necessary for him if he plans to, to win the war in Ukraine, or whether he came back to his initial idea to have a strike against Eastern Europe. In other words, I do not believe that the mobilization of this potential mobilization of this 1 million people, which he intends to collect into the army, is intended for Ukraine only. The initial plan was to take Ukraine quickly. Belarus, again, was taken in 2021 very quietly. We didn't pay attention to this. No one actually was talking about annexation or occupation of Belarus. And then to have united Russian, Belarusian, Ukrainian army to proceed into Eastern Europe. Because the initial plan was not just the recreation or rebuilding of the Soviet Empire, but also getting under Russians' control Eastern Europe, similar to the control which Soviet Union had over Eastern Europe. So the program was very ambitious. Belarus, this is a classical dictatorship. We've seen after last elections, which Lukashenko lost, that the entire Belarus people are against Lukashenko. There are military units in Ukraine which are fighting along with Ukrainians against Russian troops. It's true Lukashenko did not send Belarusians to Ukraine, but he, allows Putin to use his territory for strikes, for regrouping, for support. This is a country, which is ruled by a dictator, and we should try to help Belarusians to take him down. It's an easy task if we compare it to the change of regime in Russia, where once again I think the problem is not Putin, the problem is the state security, which runs the entire country. And once again, if we agree that Belarus is involved in this fight against Ukraine, and I think it's a fair statement, they are already in the war, we should allow Ukrainians to strike preventively. And then we will take Belarus out of Putin's control. He would lose geopolitically an important territory which allows him to proceed into Eastern Europe. And although I do believe that they are considering nuclear strikes against Ukraine, not only Ukraine, by the way, Lithuania and Poland was named by Lukashenko. Belarus was withdrawn from non-nuclear status soon after the war began. This was done on purpose. So I would not cross out the possibility of using nuclear weapons from Belarus, which is technically speaking independent, and in this case probably retaliation would go against Belarus, not against the Russian Federation, so it's much safer to Putin to try to use nuclear weapons from Belarus, not from Russia. We just should watch very closely if Russia starts to move nuclear weapons in Belarus. If this starts, I would argue Ukrainians would have to fight preventively.
Could you please? I'd like to thank our distinguished, both our distinguished panelists. Maybe one reflection. Actually, I share a lot of Mr. FELSHTINSKY's views on complex security situation, both in the region and globally. I think that first, I know there is close monitoring within NATO and among most important allies of every movement, because preparations to nuclear strike are not so easy and not instantaneous. So there is close monitoring, and collective worst prepares to this. It used to prepare, and it's still prepared for this kind of thing. And to this extent, I fully agree with Andrius speaking about cautious mentioning of nuclear weapons, because unfortunately the first reaction of societies building the collective West is to push their leaders for dirty agreement, kind of ceasefire with the current regime, with Putin, because this argument simply works for postponing any solid decision. And in my opinion, the only solution with this kind of threat and evil threat is full surrender of the Russian Federation in this war. And here I agree what kind of steps are needed. Surely full-scale support for Ukraine, full-scale arms, and understanding there is not only direct threat vis-à-vis Poland and Lithuania and other immediate neighbors, because there are a variety of Russian scenarios. And quite more distant places are also under threat, because this calculus is quite complicated as well. So I think we have to be not only vigilant in providing arguments for discussion and cautious on this. There is much more need for action now, and resolute action. We see that the will and patriotism of people even army consider as much weaker, is able to put the second army of the world in extremely difficult situation, while having particular will to defend their own territory. And our solidarity is needed. Colleagues, I'm afraid our time is almost over. If anybody wishes to take the floor, please do, because we have to hurry to vote as well.
Yes, we have to hurry, but I think we cannot conclude our conference without your statement, Ambassador.
Yeah.
Ambassador Tarasiuk, from Ambassador to the
Ukrainian Foreign Minister of Ukraine. Boris, so good to see you.
So you have the floor, Ambassador.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll try to be brief. First of all, I would like to express a sincere gratitude to you, Minister Fotyga. I remember you in this capacity as a minister, for your initiative, as well as Mr. ZLOTOWSK to convene this conference. It is more than timely conference, and the subject is very pertinent one. I would like to express gratitude to all panelists. I do agree with all of them on their analysis and their assessment. At the same time, I would like to mention a couple of facts. The war against Ukraine by Russia started not 24th of February this year, but in February 2014. So here we are facing the full-fledged or large-scale war of Russia. The war started in 2014. Second, I cannot but mention that my many years long friend not only of mine but of Ukraine, Andrei Kubilius, at one of the conferences we jointly participated, predicted that Ukraine may become member of the European Union, well, somewhere between 2025 and 2028. Why? Because 25, it is Polish presidency in the European Union, 28 and 27, Latvian and Lithuanian. Yeah. Lithuanian and Latvian.
Yeah, good.
Okay. And so I listened to his predictions with great hope and support. But it seemed to be that my good friend Andrus may be mistaken, and this might become earlier than his predictions. The membership of Ukraine in the European Union, and I am happy for this. And one thing I remember in the first days after the beginning of the war, here in the yard of the European Parliament in Strasbourg, the President of the European Parliament, Madam Metsola, she initiated a rally. And I was invited to speak in this rally, and I said that Ukraine will gain the victory in this war. And one of the members of the European Parliament present there said, Inshallah, which means in Arabic, if it will be the will of Allah. This person is well known to you. I will not mention his name, but I would like to meet him again and to remember this well, situation. And if I may, Anna, pose a question to llya PONOMAREV, whom we met many times in Kyiv in different shows, TV shows. What do you think? Is it feasible that Russia will be disrupted because of the autonomous republics in Siberia, populated homogeneously by the people of the same ethnicity and nationalities? Do you think it is feasible? Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Minister. And again, want to express that I'm very happy to meet you here. We didn't see each other since you were appointed to the European Parliament. I think that probably the most difficult thing is in this word homogeneous. Because there are no homogeneous republics, national republics in Russia. And it was Stalinist national policy, as you well know, to actually create all those entities very interlaced with different ethnicities to make sure that they would not be able to split away. Probably one of the most difficult situations right now is in the Republic of Dagestan. There is a famous saying of probably the most very well-known Dagestani poet, Rabsul Gamzatov, who once said that Dagestan never voluntarily joined Russia and never voluntarily will leave it. That very much describes the situation, because all the regional elites, they're very much afraid that their authority would be disrupted, that the money that they have and the property that they have would be disrupted. So it would be a very difficult process. At the end of the day, my forecast is that there are several regions in Russia which are likely to split away. And number one is obviously Chechnya. And I think that would be the game that Mr. Kadyrov would actually play in the situation of collapse of the Kremlin regime. I think that Kadyrov would try to actually lead the process of separation from Russia. Probably that's the only way for him to stay alive for himself. Obviously, there are pretty high chances in Yakutia, reasonably high chances with Tatarstan. But probably even if we look at the other North Caucasus republics, already the chances are significantly lower. So we may say yes, we may say no. And most likely with the other regions of Russia, it would be more not ethnical process, but economical process. When I was speaking about decolonization, and for many outside observers, people take decolonization as something which is related to nationalities. But it's not. I myself was representing Siberia for 10 years in the Russian parliament, and I may say that in the Soviet Union times, Siberians felt about themselves as the most reputable, liked, honorable people in Russia, because they were the main donors of the Soviet economy. Now they feel themselves as a colony. So to conclude, that's depends very much on what would be the next government and what it should come with. And our government wants to come with a very decentralized approach, with the attempt to recreate Russia from below, from the regions. And then they may stay. Otherwise, who knows?
Colleagues, I'm afraid that our very interesting seminar comes to an end. We have to run to vote. So allow me to thank our distinguished panelists, both present here and those who are kind enough to connect with us remotely. And we should inform that this seminar is to be web streamed, as it has been web streamed, and is to be present on in our social media as well. So please follow it. Thank you very much indeed for being present here in Strasbourg.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And to the end, наконец, я хочу бы сказать нашим гостям.
And then I would like to tell our friends from Russia, of course, well, thank you for what you have said. And we do know it's difficult to understand Russia by a reason, with a reason.
Dziękuję bardzo.